My story really doesn't begin when I start living on Earth, but in many respects begins in a funny way in this room. It is the fall of 1968, and I'm taking a course that was numbered Gov 180. Anybody else a veteran of this course? It was taught by a man named Henry Kissinger. And he lectured here day after day about how the war in Vietnam was really important to contain the Russians, that this was a proxy war. I was one of among a group of very unruly students that were sitting over there that did a lot of hissing during those lectures. I think it's probably the worst grade I got as an undergraduate at Harvard. I got a C for the course. I thought that America's policy was racist. We wanted yellow people to die instead of us. And if you know Harvard's history, you know by the next year there was a strike. But by the next year, the call came to come out to this big demo. And this was going to be actually a fairly tame demo. We weren't going to trash Massachusetts Avenue here. It's unlikely that people were going to wind up in jail. This was a teach-in around the environment that, of course, became Earth Day. And in getting ready for this week's broadcast, I look back at the life of Gaylord Nelson. Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, a Republican who became a Democrat, who Earth Day had Barry Goldwater lecturing at Adelphi at the same time that Gaylord Nelson was lecturing on another college campus. It was very ecumenical, and it was a bipartisan time that seems very ancient indeed. Nelson would say that he got that way growing up as a young man out in the Clear Lake, Wisconsin. It was, you know, maybe one of those towns. What's the saying? Was a one-horse town until the horse died. And but he said politics were intense. His family steeped him in the Progressive Party. But he said it was a small town, and it meant that every day after you had the big arguments, you had to live with everybody in town. In fact, he told the story, and he swore that this was true. Trolley, sorry, I can't remember the guy's last name, but Trolley, somebody or other from town, Nelson would tell this story, would get up at the unity breakfast after the election. People would really beat each other up and said, you know, it was just shameful how the Republicans just lied and cheated and stuffed the ballot box, but, you know, we beat them at their own game. Now, what does the Vietnam War have to do with my work in journalism? Well, at the beginning of Earth Day, I went that day when my roommate said there's going to be a big demo. But I said to myself, I'll go, but I'm kind of busy. I got a civil rights movement I'm paying attention to. I'll go, but, you know, I'm also kind of busy because the Women's Equal Rights Amendment is up. I'll go. We got a war on poverty that really needs my attention, but I'll go. And we've got this war in Vietnam. So now, here we are, 40 years later. How are we doing with civil rights? How's Mr. Obama look? How are we doing for women's rights? Yeah, but Hillary ran. Yeah, it's 80 cents on the dollar still or something. It's not all the way there. But how are we doing for wars? Are we killing, you know, Vietnam was good for 50,000 American deaths, 5 to 8 million Southeast Asian deaths. I mean, Iraq and Afghanistan are no picnics, but it's so far not on that scale. How are we doing with the environment? Now, population's gone from what? 2.5 billion back then to we're pushing 6 or whatever it is now?
6.5.
6.5. Let's see. Air quality got better with the EPA that Mr. Nixon, by the way, started. But what about the big air? What about the global air? What about the composition of that? Not just the carbon dioxide and the stuff that leads to climate change, but what about the chemicals that we have lost that are a little more insidious than DDT, the whole endocrine disruptor thing that's not just in the air, but now it's in the water and it's in the earth. Where are we with the environment today? In tough shape. Okay, Jack, now to respond to the short version of how I got into this. I did an internship in Washington on the air pollution hearings back in 1965, before my freshman year here. And in 1989, I decided to look back at what was going on and discovered this thing called climate change was really moving around air. So I rolled down to Woods Hole, where George Woodwell was holding court. I was told that I should speak with Woodwell because he knew much about this. You see this gray hair? This is something of a function of that discussion with George. Because he told me, very calmly, very organized, he said, "You ever heard of biotic feedback?" I said, no, it's nothing to do with my speaker, right? No, biotic feedback says as the Earth warms, it will get warmer. There's all this carbon in the tundra and such, and just a little bit of warming means that that'll come out faster and this is a runaway train if it gets out of control. And I said, well, I'm down here because I want to do a book about this stuff. George looked at me and he said, I don't know if anybody's told you, but I don't know that you're really qualified to do this book. I mean, there are people like Steve Schneider, we've got like McElroy, I mean, all these people who know about this. I said, well, doggone it, nobody's doing anything about this on public radio. And so the next thing I knew, I had, he'd called my bluff. I had to put this thing together. So at Earth Day plus 20, April of 1990, I did the first pilots for Living on Earth. And that was great fun, and it's a little bit depressing to look back. First 4 programs, among them, we had Sylvia Earle, her deepness, about the state of the oceans. They haven't gotten better. We did a debate about should nuclear power be rolled out to deal with the threat of climate change. We haven't made progress on that. Jesse Jackson came on the show to talk about environmental justice. And still, it seems that the less you have, the more trouble you're going to have from our environmental degradation. And the one thing that has moved is that when I surveyed potential audience, about 14% of people said that they would want to hear stories about climate change. In other words, 86% of the people did not want to hear about this. Now, if you're in the broadcast business or the media business, and you like 86% of your potential audience isn't interested in the subject, how far do you expect to get? Well, again, being from Harvard, having tilted at windmills, whether it was Henry Kissinger here or whatever, I said, you know what? People need to learn this. If they don't think that they need to know this now, they do need to know this. So, Jack, that's what got me into this. And the mission keeps changing, but the one thing that hasn't changed is that I found, just at that day, at Earth Day, that it's all connected. That it didn't make sense for me to try to step back because, well, maybe this isn't a civil rights issue, or this isn't the women's rights issue that folks I knew were working on, or whatever. It's all connected. And it's important to keep at it and to keep those connections going for us to really make progress. Because otherwise, if we go into our own little silos, we're done for. The other thing is we have run out of time. Not just me yapping here, but for us as a planet. The projection is now, we're in that zone that we have, well, if you were well, perhaps I'll turn this over to Eric Shivian to talk about the kind of time that we have left in the areas that he cares about. And I think we'll hear about it from Alexander, and we'll hear about it from Mark. We've got very little time left until we find a way to turn the system around. I know one part of the answer is what Gaylord Nelson said. We can fight amongst each other, but the next day we really need to keep talking, otherwise we won't get there.